Hey, you guys, just something for you to look up. I would look up Bristol stool chart. It's really fun. It's a good time. You want to pull this thing? Let's pull this thing. There's one. Selena update. We actually had 40-inch Bajas on here before, but the actual tire package we have is 39 Baja TA KRs. On Innovate, we might be the first people to just gloss black powder coat these bad boys. The front, we've been just kind of focusing on the front, and steering's on now. We talked about having the steering on last time. Clearance the firewall. The fenders and the headlight and the grille are all living here. They're not like mock-up, they're on. They're almost done, and then the next step here that we're gonna be working on is solidifying the front bumper. Once we solidify the front bumper, we will figure out all the accessories in the engine bay and just from A-pillar forward, finish it. Not weld everything, just finish everything, only weld the stuff that we need to. And then what we're gonna do, I mean, obviously like there's layers to some stuff, so if we need to weld particular spots, we will, but more than likely we will weld the whole thing out over a couple days. So I'm gonna get into this thing. I have it set at full bump or full compression. Obviously there's some revisions we need to make because of the wider tire and the hub program. We kind of took the 40 into account, but it was sitting just on the, you know, the wheel mounting surface of the Dana 44. So this will be a new trim, but like we've already trimmed a lot of the factory stuff just to make sense and have good design into it. So right now it's compression. I kind of wanted to highlight the steering in there and just show you guys how tight things are and the packaging in there. So I'm gonna grab a light and then we'll go under there. Let's look at steering. So this thing obviously has Bronco style suspension, fabricated beams, Andrew Cho beams. We obviously don't have the spindle done yet, but we do have the tire package and the wheel package on here and the steering on here. Last time we did an update, the steering was not on here. And I have this thing at full compression or full bump where you can kind of see the inner workings of the packaging and the space. There's a lot of stuff going on in a little amount of room. So, you know, everything kind of has a home. You can see the beam bump, like you can see the tolerances here. You can see the steering. So this thing does steer lock to lock, and obviously this tie rod on both sides will kind of raise or lower based on where the wheel is turning. This is a extended sector shaft steering box from PSS, and it's got like a sector shaft support here that we built into it. And you have your pitman arm, fabricated pitman arm with a drag link. Drag link goes to the swinger, and there's a small little center link in here. Let me see if I can get a better angle. Oh yeah, all the tie rods. So here you go. So you have your pitman arm here. Hey Joey, quiet on the set. Quiet on the set, dude. Rude. Rude. So fabricated pitman arm. This is a Cho pitman arm. We were just fortunate enough to kind of get the stuff and get it TIG welded. Drag link, center link hiding in there. Driver's side tie rod, passenger side tie rod. So there's two swingers. Both of the swingers, if you kind of sight like this swinger that goes to the passenger beam is in line or almost in line with the passenger beam pivot. And it's the same thing with the driver beam pivot and the driver steering pivot. So they all kind of, you know, swing in the same line and parallel as the beam and the suspension. And when it droops out, it's the same situation. So when it droops, it's just all in line, and you're alleviating as much bump steer as possible. With this, we have all of it out. Like, there is no bump steer through the whole entire cycle on the driver's side. There is a 1/4 inch of toe in at compression on the passenger side. And I think that's just largely in part to the passenger beam being so short. But it is what it is, and I'm totally good on it. So that's that. We'll cycle this thing. We're gonna droop it out and cycle it, but you know, I wanted to cover the steering, and we'll come back to that because I want to kind of get you guys caught up with the updates in the order that we did them. So some of the stuff just in the inside of the cab that we got done. Colin kind of went ahead and tested out his sheet metal skills into the floorboards. This has all been welded where it ties to the frame. And then we have, you know, all the holes kind of patched up. So holes where the front door bars are, B pillar, X, all these are ready for welding. Everything's been welded underneath, so we didn't shoot ourselves in the foot. The inside here, whoa! We also added our signature aero tube or streamline tube. This is from aviation or aircraft. It's a teardrop shape, so the top profile is like a greater radius, a major and a minor axis, and that's going to be like our signature tie-in for all of our cages for the windshield intrusion bars. So we do have some of the sheet metal here also sealed, so there is no like loose ends as far as the B pillar forward, as far as the cab, you know, having holes in it. You can see that we clearanced the firewall for the tires at full bump and full lock. We didn't want to make a bunch of extravagant bead rolls in here. I think there's a time and a place for bead rolling, like nice big shapes, but for like a, you know, a truck that's gonna retain a lot of the factory sheet metal, I think that running like something more conservative in these areas makes more sense. I do like that we have kind of the tube integrated into that, and then this is just like a, you know, a rib that's really reminiscent of like factory floorboard or firewall that will also kind of protect the sheet metal from like big rock stuff or any kind of splash. You get some rigidity out of it where you're not just doing like, you know, a bead roll that doesn't really have a place, or there's nothing, no other shapes like the bead roll in the whole firewall. So this thing's all drooped out now. You can kind of see everything stays parallel. The wheels stay straight. Just, you can kind of, like, this is a good example of the swinger situation. So obviously we need to put a ram assist on here. The ram assist is gonna run off the drag link, but be on the opposing side of the steering box. It's kind of like a push-pull, almost like a bicep and a tricep that kind of help each other out. So get that going. You can kind of see right now, like all the shock mounts, the lower shock mounts and the sway bar mounts are done. We are gonna run a front sway bar. I don't know if a lot of beam trucks have that, but it makes sense for me for the driving dynamics. So what I wanna do is, I can kind of go over the details of the shock mounts and stuff, but you know, I'd like to do this almost in order of how we built it. So I'm gonna get the hood open and go over the sway bar mount, because that's kind of a big integrated part of the front of this thing. So one of the things we for sure wanted to get on here was the sway bar. I've always wanted to have a front sway bar on a beam truck. Say what you will, but I really feel like the handling dynamics and the drivability of a vehicle with a front sway bar is considerably different, especially with all the unsprung weight of like a four-wheel drive beam. So you can kind of see this is our mock-up. It's a big long arm, and it's a big long tie rod for the sway bar. So It usually, when it's at ride height, we wanted to get the tie rod like square and centered, vertical. But you can see it's very packaged in. So where the actual bar, the torsion bar goes through the chassis, it's all integrated into the support for the cooler as well. So you can kind of follow the sway bar arm all the way into the chassis. It is hiding under our radiator tray mounts. You can see where it's going to attach. You can see a mock-up bushing in there. And all the stuff that's tacked is going to be like the saddle capture for this thing. More stuff that we added here. Obviously, the mounts, so the whole fender system, the headlight system, the grille, all of this unbolts, and it unbolts in a fashion where if we wanted to just run the radiator can stay in, and then if we want to run, just the headlights and grille, we can take the fenders off. So all of it is modular, and it all comes apart in a way where it doesn't have to, you're not relying on one to have the other. The same with like this tray, all the radiator comes out. So this whole entire piece is all bolt in, and we don't have the linkage here or the like the machined rods that connect it, but this will all be removable so the engine can come out. The lower portion of this tray, there's a lot of design that's just into the radiator tray. This radiator is the perfect width for the Tundra application, and especially for the grille. If you kind of look, even like where the headlights want to be, it's just the perfect span, and even the height is ideal for the grille shell. But you can see like everything's bolt on. This is your tray, and then we're gonna have like neoprene padding to kind of isolate the cooler from the mounts, upper and lower. And what I was saying is we do have, like, you can see the bolt pickup here and the bolt pickup here. This is gonna be a machine dowel that goes on driver's side and passenger side. But what's nice is like this whole subframe, like this is your grille shell subframe here. You can kind of see the tube work, and the this upper portion, it bolts into these tabs. So when the dowels go in here that hold it, that's its own thing. That'll be in between these two tabs, and then these come off. So again, if you wanted to just run this thing with just a radiator, you could go out to the dunes or wherever, just have the radiator on, have no big tube work sticking out for the fender or any of the grille stuff. Or you could take the fenders off and just run, like, that's probably what I'd want, would just be like the headlights and the grille. So we've been like considering that with everything we do, is like how easy is this thing going to be to work on, how much stuff can come off without having a headache of pulling more stuff off to get to the layers. And we've been really stressing that. Another thing to kind of look at too is like design. I mean, everything is very flowy with all the shapes and the surfaces and the lines. And if you just start to like register all the plate work and the tube work, everything kind of hits in a special way. So we're waiting on Morgan to do the passenger side shock mount, which I've been putting off over and over and over. So that one's on me. Sean's been taking care of everything else. We had like provisions to save the sheet metal for the wiper cowl that kind of goes from this windshield, and it's almost like a trough. What we're gonna do with that is we're just gonna delete that whole thing because it looks nice in here, it looks tidy. It doesn't need that extra piece of sheet metal. We just need to have some kind of like a cowling that protects where the air conditioner gets its air from, like the filter area. So we'll get something there. And then just on James's truck too, we had like a, like an 1/8 inch aluminum panel with mesh cutouts. We'll do the same thing in this, and then we'll get the reservoirs mounted onto the tube work here. So back into here, I want to cover the shock mounts. There's a lot that goes into beam trucks, and figuring out shock mounts and figuring out how to make everything cycle properly. Like with this, with a beam truck in general, you want the shocks kind of angled back as much as you can for like approach angle. We were just limited by wanting to run the factory brake booster. So that's kind of what limits our coilover space. So we got things as good as we can, and I think with the 4-wheel drive and just how far out we are on the beam, everything has worked out. We have that 24-inch travel number. I don't know what the axles are going to say about that, but as far as like metal on metal and suspension cycling, we definitely accomplished that. All these shock mounts, you can kind of see like there's a bypass. There's the bypass mount, which is an interesting shape, and you can even see like how it's dug out here, and that's because of the steering. You know, it gets close. It's not going to move, it's not going to flex, but you can see like when this thing's going through its cycle, things move. And that's what I was getting at with beams, is there's a lot of things about beams that are trickier than A-arms, because you're dealing with a weird motion ratio and movement ratio. It's almost like an offset pivot, huge lower arm, and that's all it does. And it's like a big triangle that goes up and down in a weird angle that you know, can really throw you for a loop. You have to consider several different things all while you're taking every step in building the beam setup and the steering setup and the shock mounts and the bump and now the sway bars too. You can kind of see we've tried to catch some good parallels with the shafts, and then you can also see like the sway bar mount. It's all boxed in. Everything in here is boxed, so there's not like a tab that's going to be just a cap and then you're going to get water in there. It's something to think about just for serviceability and for, you know, preventative maintenance for the future. So my favorite part about the front of this thing so far, we had, like, you can see that the steering box, the framework for the steering box has been like, if you looked at it dead on, the frame kicks in and then it comes back out to make provisions for the steering box and the sector shaft, especially when this tire comes in. You know, when this thing moves in and then it goes up, it gets close, right? So if we had the steering box out any further, then it's just gonna bind into all the suspension travel. So with that being said, we have like this, you know, we have the box up high and the sector shaft there, so we can run it. We can run the pitman arm lower without having this thing in harm's way. But we have such a big structure here that when it came to the other side, this portion, there was nothing here. And you know, I've wanted to do, like, I've been kicking around doing this huge tubular gusset where it's like it's got tension, where this bend is not just centered, but it's like it's pulled down here, so it's grabbing a lot of surface area on the engine cage tube, and then it's kind of like a stump of a tree kind of landing into the frame, and that like gussets this whole portion, and it keeps the strength and the rigidity similar to the steering box that's on the other side. You can kind of see it in there. You can kind of see all the integration here. So you have your sway bar mount that's also integrated into the pickup for the radiator and also for the fender and headlight mount core support. And then that gusset tube goes up and grabs all that structure there and supports it. Now that tube didn't come out of nowhere. That's the same design we used for the gussets on the A-pillar to the windshield tube here. So you can kind of see that same program. Big 2-inch gusset where the tension, most of the mass of that material is being grabbed on the A-pillar, and it's just going up to support the windshield tube. So you can see how that's kind of drawn into there. And it's that same program you get here. Another thing you'll notice too is, like I mentioned, the steering box being kicked over, you know, favoring kind of going towards the middle of the truck. What we had is like we left this area open because, you know, since the frame rail would want to just come out here, and if we kick the steering box over, our frame rail was so far inboard from where the passenger side is that we needed to do something, because what that's going to do is then we're going to start building a bumper and we're going to start landing all this stuff, and it's going to be super inconsistent per side where the symmetry is going to be shot. And especially when you're trying to build like a bumper tube and skid plates, we needed to do something where it made sense to kind of get that same shape and that same spatial awareness over onto the passenger side. So that's what we have here. You can kind of see we made a cut. There's your your stock frame rail here. We cut it in and we built this cap. So this steering box cap of the frame here, now the whole frame has been moved over and shifted. So from center, it's the same. It comes out on the same side. So then, you know, it's a domino effect. So now we can run our miter section for the bottom of the bumper where the skid plate's gonna land. We can run this with the same symmetry per side where we're not like, you know, this tube is more vertical and then this one's coming from farther away and kicking at a different angle. It brings everything back to square where we can play our cards for the next step. Because if you start getting weird stuff like that early into the build or, you know, deep into the skeletal system here, then once it starts getting manifested into like the next step, it's going to be detrimental on design and maybe even function. So you can see that miter section. This is a partition section. So there's actually you know, one of these tubes is capped and welded, and then the other tube is welded onto that. So you get full penetration and you get like a wall, like a gusset in there. So super strong kinds. This is another gusset here that's taking these inset engine cage tubes and tying that line into this junction. So everything is one solid unit here. Same with this side. Next step here is going to be, like I said, we're going to finish the whole front first. What that looks like, we are finalizing the grill mount right now. So all this structure is to hold the grill and to hold these little valence pieces. The bumper situation, just going to be going out to like the perimeter of the grill shell. So once that goes on here, I think I'm going to set that on right now. So we just utilized the factory lower pins on this thing, and then it's going to have a mounting location, tie in. Hold on. There we go. So it's still going to tie into the valence pieces, and then it'll have its own tabs up here too. But it's just like it's already there and it works. As long as we solidify mounts on each corner and the top, then that thing will stay exactly where it needs to. As far as the bumper, radius, only going out to these perimeters, probably crack a little bit of a bend here, a little bit of a bend here, and then cap it. Then have like tie-in tubes. So we'll for sure obviously land down to these corners, and that's gonna give us a skid plate. You know, I like with beam trucks, I'd prefer them to be like a rectangular skid plate instead of, you know, like some kind of non-functional diamond shape or something that's really tapered in. Like if an A-arm truck has like a center pivot setup, then obviously you could run a skid plate that tapers to kind of protect when it needs to. But when you have like big swingers and beams and frame rails and a steering box, like I think a rectangular shape is optimal. So we're gonna kind of get a little hybrid of that where obviously this is not the same width as the grill shell. So we'll taper, you know, it'll still have tapers, but it's not gonna be something that goes super skinny here where you got like structure hanging off the side. This thing will be fully functional. I don't think we're going to build it super close to the grill. I think we'll leave a couple inches. Approach angle is something huge with this, and also, you know, leaving a provision for lights or for just disaster where, you know, you have some kind of an accident. It looks cool to tuck the bumper super close, but functionally with what we're building here, we're going to keep it a couple inches away. As far as our steering situation, we'll send the box out to Charlie at Power Steering Solution, but first we need to finalize the ram assist mount. So obviously the drag link here is the candidate that's going to get that. We're going to tab this, and then we'll tab to kind of the back side of this lower bumper tube, maybe even go up to this middle one. We really want to try to get it as inline as possible on the drag link. So if we have something shooting down, that's not as optimal as getting something more parallel. Let's go up to the top. So like I talked about, we'll have like a, you know, a kind of a wiper cowl, a custom wiper cowl that'll be aluminum, 1/8 inch aluminum, tabbed level profile with the hood, and then like just ventilation pockets with stainless mesh. The coilover reservoirs that are just hanging out here on top of the blower there, we will find provisions for them probably on the tubes that go to the intrusion bars. As far as more packaging in here, definitely need to figure out provisions for the intake. This thing will be here, 9-inch cone filter with like an outerwear, like a pre-filter on it. Very simple, doesn't rob power like a UMP or anything. And we're just gonna have to figure out something clever here to kind of pull a U-turn in time to avoid the piggyback reservoir for the bypass. The factory ECU that kind of plugs into the firewall over there, everything clears, so we just need to put that back in. We just took everything out just to be safe for, you know, all the fabrication and welding and metal prep on the firewall. But that thing plugs right back in. There's definitely a really good platform here for sheet metal work. I don't know if that's something that we're gonna do right off the bat, but we just wanna get all the mechanicals done on this thing. So the last feature up front here, this little pocket that you see, this is absolutely for nothing more than looks. There's no void that this goes to. There's nothing, like there's no air that's directed in this thing. This thing is just for cool guy points from Toyota. So what we got out of this is a 40-inch Baja Designs bar will fit perfect in here. I'm just gonna cut some of this out. So this is maybe only an inch tall, and I'm gonna remove a lot of this so we can fit a full double stack Baja Designs bar in here. Okay, so we kind of talked about where we're gonna be at next as far as updates. I don't think that's gonna be enough for an update, like just packaging the whole front out. So I wanna kind of dive into what's beyond just the front. The next phase, and that's the way to kind of do this, at least for this build, is to operate in phases as far as our, you know, our updates. This thing's pretty much sealed as far as like B-pillar forward. What we want to do is get the dash done, trim the dash, fit it, just whatever we need to figure out there. If there's anything that pops up that we need to handle, I want to get it done. I don't want to worry about the dash later. I want the thing to be in there and done. That probably means painting a lot of the cage before we put the dash in, just so it's not prematurely rusting. One of the things we spoke about earlier is the master cylinder for the brakes. It's living in here, and it needs to have like an extension, and it needs to have a cap somewhere. Somewhere where it's fillable, somewhere where you don't have risk of spilling brake fluid, you know, and it's accessible. So that all needs to happen, and then we're gonna go seat mounts. That'll be like our next big thing. Sliding seat on a actuator for the driver, and then all 3 other seats will just be fixed in place. Everything will have like a, you know, a tubular cradle with tabs. Same with the rear. So the driver and co-driver already have a harness bar for the shoulder straps. The rear will get the same thing, no eyelets whatsoever, except for your waist. Just, I don't believe in the shoulder eyelets. So we'll make sure there's like a secondary tube that goes in there to grab, you know, your shoulder harnesses. So I would expect that as like the next big portion. Dash in, center console finalized. This thing at least painted in the underpinnings with the filler for the brakes, and then all of the seats in, and it's gonna really give you a good idea of how much space is back here. All this stuff, all the shortening the wheelbase, making sure that it's a 4-seater, having the shocks in the cab, this is all calculated because we knew how much space was back here. This thing is super long, so you know, building this thing out to the level that it's built and leaving that wheelbase back there would shoot us in the foot with handling in the long run. You know, shortening it to that 135 zone, it's gonna make a huge difference over the 10 inches longer than it already was. I know there's a lot to cover. I know there's a lot we have covered here. If you guys, it's broken record, if you guys have questions about this stuff, or you see something that kind of strikes your eye that you want us to cover more in depth, please comment. The progress on this thing will be steadily coming, so you'll be able to expect these updates to be consistent. We're gonna be on this thing till it's done. And just like a lot of the vehicles in here, we're gonna go out, we're gonna test it, we're gonna drive it. You guys can meet JP, the owner, and see what it does in the desert. Thank you guys for your support. We appreciate it. Please like, comment, subscribe, or like, comment, subscribe. And we look forward to the next one.